is the main election headquarters, with numbers most accurate, data most reliable, and viewership across the platforms. Stay tuned to the Great Indian Election only on weekdays at 8:30 p.m. IST and 1500 hours GMT.
It's 7:30 p.m. live from New Delhi. You're watching DD India Global. We'll get you the top stories from India and the region. I'm Prasar Bharati, and for news from the rest of the world, I'm joined by my colleague Benji here in Washington. Good to have you with us, Benji.
Yes, good morning. 10 a.m. here in Washington, 3 in the afternoon across Central Europe. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, the latest from two hotbeds of war and territorial clashes with calls for a ceasefire, Gaza and Ukraine. And the US's relationship with another Eurasian state, Georgia, is at risk. We'll have all that shortly. First, though, back to you.
Finance ministers, central bankers from G7 discuss on how to use frozen Russian assets in the West to help Ukraine. World Bank says it's open to managing a G7 loan to Kiev. Russian President Vladimir Putin signals ceasefire in ongoing conflict against Ukraine, says prepare to fight on if Kiev and the West do not respond. Louisiana passes bill to categorize 2 abortion pills as controlled substances that carry potential for abuse or addiction. India to vote in the penultimate phase of General Election 2024, polling in 58 constituencies across 6 states and 2 union territories. Finance ministers and central bankers from the G7 nations are trying to make progress on how to use frozen Russian assets in the West to help Ukraine. World Bank has expressed support in managing the fund for Ukraine. The 2-day meeting has kicked off in Italy, where they are also expected to discuss China's industrial policies, which they consider unfair, artificial intelligence, and taxes for multinational companies. All right, and for more on this, we've been joined by Giles Gibson, who's joining us from Rome. Giles, how close are the G7 to a deal over using frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine?
Well, at this stage, there is no real expectation that these finance ministers are going to be able to actually thrash out a deal when it comes to those frozen Russian assets. I mean, just take, for example, the German finance minister Christian Lindner saying that there are still many legal and technical issues that need to be resolved. A US official under Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, saying that they are hoping for some progress on the principles around this, but not actually the fine details. Let me just sort of sketch out for you this debate that we've seen going on for months and months now. On the one side, you've had the US and Canada in particular pushing for there to be just a simple confiscation of these frozen Russian assets, and then for them to be handed over to the Ukrainians, a pretty simple kind of structure there. And then you have the Europeans who, on the other side of this debate, are much more concerned about the technicalities, about the legal details, very much concerned that there could be some sort of a dangerous precedent set by all of this. So what we appear to be approaching is kind of a middle ground where there would be this potentially up to a $50 billion loan issued by potentially, as you mentioned, the World Bank, with those frozen Russian assets used as collateral for that loan. As I say, we don't expect any sort of a deal to be done at this meeting of finance ministers, but potentially we could see some sort of an announcement, a concrete announcement, when we have the Leaders Summit, which is coming up next month.
Okay, Giles, and What do we expect from the G7 in relation to China?
Well, going into this meeting, we've had the US announcing that their new higher tariffs on Chinese goods are going to be kicking in on the 1st of August. Those tariffs targeting everything from electric vehicles themselves to the batteries that those EVs run off, and indeed all sorts of different medical devices. Now, there is no sense that the Americans are trying to get the Europeans to follow suit with those sorts of tariffs, and indeed there is no real chance that the Europeans would consider that. I mean, just listen to our friend the German finance minister again saying that trade wars are all about losing, you can't win them. But I do expect by the end of these 2 days of talks on the shores of that lake in northern Italy for there to be at least some sort of common tough language agreed by the G7 as a whole, expressing concern about the impact that Chinese imports are having on their economies.
All right, thank you so much for your analysis, Giles. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has claimed that Ukraine has used US-supplied weapons to attack targets beyond the conflict zone and hit civilian infrastructure.
For a very long time, they were stating that they do not encourage the use of Western arms against targets in Russia. Then they said they would not allow it. Then they advised against using it again. But in fact, they are waging a war against us, and American weapons have already been used on a variety of objects outside the conflict zone.
2 people were killed by Ukrainian missile strike near Simferopol, the second largest city on the Crimean Peninsula. In a separate incident, Russian air defenses intercepted 3 missiles over Crimea and neutralized 3 Ukrainian maritime drones. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited a printing house in the northeastern city of Kharkiv on Friday, a day after it was destroyed in a Russian missile attack that killed at least 7 people. Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city, is currently facing a surge in Russian airstrikes. It has been hit by daily missile and drone strikes for months, with the city and its surrounding area under constant attack. And big news coming in, Russia's President Vladimir Putin is reportedly ready to halt the conflict in Ukraine. My colleague Benji Hire is in Washington and gives us more on this and other stories making headlines around the world. Benji, Russian president ready to halt.
Yes, Russia's president wants a ceasefire that recognises the current battlefield lines. In other words, that includes Russia taking Ukrainian territory. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has refused to engage on those terms, demanding Russia's troops first withdraw. But Russian spokesperson Dmitry Peskov claims his country does not desire a perpetual conflict. DD India's Dasha Chernyshova reports from Moscow.
Repeating constantly that Moscow is open for the negotiations, but having said that, you have to keep in mind that Moscow will be negotiating, but it will be negotiating on the current realities on the ground. This is what the Kremlin has been saying is the prerequisite for the start of those negotiations, and saying that at this moment, as Moscow doubts the legitimacy of the current president of Ukraine, Vladimir Zelensky, whose term has expired earlier in May, Moscow has to establish whom it can negotiate with in Ukraine and whom it can trust, once again saying that it was frustrated the way how the negotiations proceeded back in 2022 when the sides met in Istanbul and negotiated a solution. And also we have heard today from the head of Russia's foreign intelligence, Sergei Naryshkin, saying that the Western elites are frustrated because they understand that the strategic initiative is on the front lines, is in the hands of the Russian Federation. So in this current circumstance, it does not seem to be the case that Moscow will be willing to end the conflict at this moment on the current positions. Moscow will indeed be more likely achieving the goals until they are fully accomplished.
Israel has recovered the bodies of 3 hostages taken into Gaza by Hamas on October 7th of last year. The victims were recovered in a special Israeli military operation carried out in Jabalia in the north of the Strip, the scene of renewed fighting in recent days. Israeli authorities say more than 120 hostages kidnapped on October 7th are still being held in the Palestinian territory.
Our men, women, children and babies being held by Hamas in living hell across our border in Gaza. We will not stop fighting for their freedom. Every decent country in the world would do the same.
But the International Court of Justice on Friday ordered Israel to stop its operation in Rafah. The court convened an emergency session to consider a request from South Africa urging Israel to halt military incursions into the southern Gaza city, where hundreds of thousands of displaced Palestinians are still sheltering. Many have already fled. The US suggests Israel has officially abandoned a full-scale invasion of the area, though Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is still vowing to continue his campaign to defeat Hamas units in Rafah. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has declined to speculate on whether his country would execute an International Criminal Court arrest warrant for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He notes that no warrant has yet been issued and states that Israel is a democratic state with an independent judiciary. Israel previously slammed Germany over reports that Berlin would arrest Mr. Netanyahu were the ICC to issue an arrest warrant against him.
What will happen now must be decided by a committee of judges, and we have to wait and not speculate. The German government expects judges to bear in mind that Israel is a democratic state with a strong and independent judiciary.
UK lawmakers are finishing up parliamentary business shortly before joining their party campaigns ahead of the July 4th general election. A number of laws could still be passed in time. However, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says that a smoking ban for younger generations will not be signed into legislation before the vote. DD India's Ollie Barrett sends us this report from London.
Well, Friday marks the end of this parliamentary session, and that means that some legislation is being wrapped up, some is including bills that do things like work on the compensation scheme in the infected blood scandal here in the UK, but some legislation won't make it, such as the Prime Minister's flagship smoking and vaping legislation. That is going by the wayside, which the Prime Minister acknowledges is a shame. He says he'll bring it back if he remains Prime Minister after the next election, but his critics say it's a sign that he doesn't stick to his own promises.
And the smoking ban, of course, disappointed to not be able to get that through at the end of this session, given the time available. But what I'd say is that's evidence of the bold action that I'm prepared to take. That's the type of Prime Minister I am. That's the type of leadership that I bring.
Now, for many MPs, it's actually their last day at work in many ways, because over 100 parliamentarians are not standing at the next general election for various different reasons. So many of them will be leaving Westminster on Friday and not returning there as MPs. Parliament officially dissolved next week, but the campaign trail very much up and running. The party leaders on Friday have, to a large extent, been talking about energy policy, with Labour and the Conservatives both criticising each other's plans in that regard. And a growing theme as well at the moment is television debates and how many there will be. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says he'll do one every week with Keir Starmer between now and the election, so there could be as many as 6 of them if he gets his way, and he says that Keir Starmer is running scared by not taking him up on that offer. Keir Starmer says he's happy to do television debates, but probably not as many as Rishi Sunak wants, because he wants to spend his time talking to the British people. Remains to be seen how many televised debates there will be, but when we get there you can be sure that those two men will be attacking each other. Heading into the weekend, of course, that is a moment that a lot of campaigning will take place, because more people are at home, more doors can be knocked on by parliamentary candidates and their supporters, and indeed the party leaders up and down the country. So it's a busy few days ahead on the campaign trail. Ollie Barrett in London reporting for DD India.
Georgia's ruling party has accused the United States of pursuing a policy of, quote, threats and blackmail against Georgia over its decision to impose visa restrictions against members of the parliament who backed a controversial foreign agents bill. The law has sparked political protests in the Eurasian country, with fears it could limit free speech, and it's led to the US imposing visa restrictions on Georgia. The State Department here is also launching a review of bilateral cooperation between the two nations. Georgia's government calls that decision comical. And here, Louisiana has become the first US state to reclassify 2 abortion-inducing drugs as Schedule 4 drugs. That's a category of medications carrying the potential for abuse or addiction. The state's lawmakers passed the bill on Thursday, making unprescribed possession of mifepristone and misoprostol a crime, punishable by 1 to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $5,000. That'll make it much harder for doctors to prescribe the medicines. Well, that's it from me here in Washington. Back to you in the studio.
Well, thank you so much, Bendy. Really appreciate it. And still to come on DD India Global. Hundreds dead after massive landslide hits remote village in northern Papua New Guinea. And India continues to shine at the 77th Cannes Film Festival.
Complex issues, hidden agendas, twists and turns, strategic games. We think all dots are linked. We just need to connect them. Join me every week as I connect the dots to unravel hidden designs in statecraft, mysteries, and decode issues that matter to you. Watch Connecting the Dots with me at these times on DD India.
You're watching DD India Global. I'm Siddharth Bharadwaj, and let's get you the latest on the world's largest election in India. The world's largest election in world's largest democracy is nearing its end. Polling in the second last phase of India's parliamentary election will take place on 25th of May. 58 seats across 6 states and 2 union territories are up for grabs. The campaigning for 6th phase election ended on Thursday. A total of 889 candidates are in the fray. Polling will also be conducted in Jammu and Kashmir's Anantnag Rajouri constituency after the polling date was postponed from 7th May to 25th. With less than 24 hours left for the polling to begin in 8 seats of the Lok Sabha in West Bengal, preparations are in full swing in the Tamluk Lok Sabha constituency for the smooth conduction of elections tomorrow. Take a look at this ground report by DD India's Dibyendu Mondal.
Last-minute preparations for the polling are underway. This is the Tamluk Lok Sabha constituency where you can see the polling parties are being disbursed to their respective polling stations from here. This is the polling material distribution and receiving center for about 4 to 5 assembly segments within the Tamluk Lok Sabha constituency here in West Bengal. The EVMs are being thoroughly checked by the polling parties. The polling parties are being handed over the polling materials that will be required to conduct smooth polling tomorrow when the polling begins at about 7 a.m. in the morning. Also, the polling parties are checking the EVM units, the control unit, as well as the VVPAT to ensure that each and everything works fine tomorrow when the polling starts. Continuous announcements are being made by the election commission officials who are posted here to help people who are coming here to collect their polling materials or the EVM distribution materials that are being distributed from this particular school ground here in Tomluk today evening itself to check if everything is fine, after which they will set up the polling station, the temporary polling stations in their respective areas wherever they have been posted. So of course all eyes tomorrow to see the 6th phase of polling here in West Bengal and particularly from the Tomluk Lok Sabha constituency here in West Bengal. With camera person PK, this is Dibyendu Mondal from Tomluk in West Bengal for DD India.
And at least 100 people are feared dead in a massive landslide that occurred in a remote village of Papua New Guinea on Friday morning. The death toll is expected to increase. The incident that happened 600 kilometers north of the capital Port Moresby razed homes, gardens and everything else to the ground. The number of people trapped within the debris remains unknown. Search and rescue is underway for survivors. Days after Taiwan's new president Lai Ching-te took office, China has called for an end to the island nation's independence efforts. China also objected to Taiwan's decision to participate in a key World Health Organization meeting this month. China's response came after the United States and several of its allies, including Britain, Germany and Japan, issued a joint statement on Friday asking Taiwan to participate in the meeting.
Taiwan is China's Taiwan, and it is not the turn of the United States to say anything about it. The root cause of the tense situation in the Taiwan States lies in the attempts of DPP authorities to use the United States to seek independence and some forces in the United States under the guise of maintaining regional peace and stability. It is attempting to use Taiwan to control China.
In an attempt to punish Taiwan's new president Lai Ching-te, China staged mock missile strikes and dispatched fighter jets carrying live missiles along with bombers. The drills in the Taiwan Strait included mock bombing of foreign vessels. The bombers set up multiple attack formations in Taiwan's eastern waters, carrying out simulated attacks in coordination with naval ships. China criticized Lai's inaugural speech in which he urged Beijing to stop its threats and said the two sides of the strait were not subservient to each other. And let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. The United Nations Human Rights Office on Friday warned that there's a risk of a serious rise in violence in Myanmar's Rakhine state. It said that it has received frightening and disturbing reports of the killing of Rohingya people and burning of property. A restaurant on the Spanish island of Mallorca partly collapsed on Thursday, killing at least 4 people and injuring 16. Many others are feared trapped inside the debris. A 48-year-old man was shot dead by police in New Caledonia a day after France's President Emmanuel Macron visited the riot-hit French-ruled Pacific island. It was the 7th reported death since the start of the unrest last week. British actor Tom Holland is back on stage in London's West End, starring as Romeo in a new production of William Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. The film and TV star known for playing Spider-Man is starring opposite actor Francesca Amevuda Rivers as Juliet in her West End debut. The 77th Cannes Film Festival has truly been extraordinary for India so far. Sunflowers were the first ones to know. A short film directed by Chidanand Nayak bagged the first prize at the 2024 La Cinef prizes on Thursday. The winning films were screened after the award ceremony. La Cinef consisted of 18 student films chosen out of 2,263 entries from 555 film schools around the world. The lights of Vivid were lit, bathing Sydney in a rush of colour, sound and flavour. This year, trains trundling around the city's circle were also transformed into rave caves. For over 23 nights, the Festival of Vivid will revolve around the theme of humanity and a universal search for meaning and purpose. That's all for this edition of DD India Live, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. This is DD India Global, and for those on the go, you can get all the latest news and updates from India and across the world on DD India mobile app. The app is available on both Android and iOS platforms. Scan the QR code on the screen to download now. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Siddharth Bharadwaj from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India Global.